Good evening. Good evening. May I interrupt all the conversations momentarily because I'd like to get the program started. We have a tremendous amount to cover tonight. There's discussions, there's content, there's dancing in the streets, there's a lot to do. Now, I've got one piece of organizational thing that, as a trainer, I'm not good at tasking. So listen carefully because I'm going to get it wrong and someone else will have to tell you what to do. If you are a member of a corporate organization, I'm going to ask you to sit in one of two tables. One table will be here. This is at the direction of our presenter tonight, LeNir, or at the table directly against that wall. So if you can do that. So let me ask, who here is part of, is internal within a corporation? Okay. I'm going to ask you to move to either there or there. And if you don't want to move, that's okay. I thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight. I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight. Okay, a couple of things before we even get started. I'd like all of you to know that, as has been our practice, we are simulcasting tonight's program. We started this in January, and it is part of our mission to make sure that our constituency, people in learning and development, people in human resources, people who are interested in changing the world through learning, have access to the best quality information that you can possibly have, and have it at a price that makes a great deal of sense. For those of you who are here, I want to welcome you tonight. It's a fabulous program. We'll have tremendous interaction, great meal. For those of you who are on the broadcast tonight, I want to say thank you and welcome. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email, send an email to the board. We care about that very much. And for those of you who understand the price of clicking in on the webcast, there is no cost for that. So if you can't be here, if your corporation is not supporting you, then and you feel the need, you can dial in and still get the information. We are finding all sorts of different ways to make sure that the value that we provide meets your needs, meaning it's on target, and is at a price point that anyone can afford. So one more thing that goes with the webcast, and that goes with the website, and that is we are now putting pictures on the website. So if you see someone with a camera taking a picture of you, know that it will go on the website. And if you have a serious issue about that, just tell the person, and of course it won't go there. So, yes, Anne will do that. So before we do housekeeping and a couple of cultural things, the website is a new website, and I want to recognize the website team for taking care of that, because they've migrated us from one version to the next, and we can now do things with that website we could never do before. So adding pictures is one of those examples. And so this summer, Tom Speak, Anne, Martha Kramer, and Ann Cheng did a lot of work moving that website from here to there. I also want to embarrass the living daylights out of one person who was on the original team that got us on the website, and thank you, Kim, who's sitting back at one of the corporate tables. So a couple of things that you always have to do when you're doing a meeting. So does everybody know when they need to take a break where to go? And that has nothing to do with cigarettes. Okay. Second thing is, if you need to escape because something bad has happened, you can go out this way, you can go out that way. So it's, make sure there's a good reason, not just, and I'll leave it at that. The third thing is around culture and networking and the world we are creating in this room this evening. And so just a quick story about me. For years, I worked for Pfizer. For years, I worked for GE, and I came to these meetings and always felt very comfortable. So I've now moved across the aisle, so I'm now working with a consulting company. And I still feel the same level of comfort. And it's all based on the relationships we build with each other. It's the cooperation, it's the long-term focus. And so as you look to build those relationships, that's how it all works here. We help each other, we partner with each other, and as you're networking and looking to see what your future should be, we stay here with that. So thank you. This is the first meeting of the year. I'm still a little academic at heart. I teach at Columbia, so I hit September and I say, it's a brand new year. It may not be doesn't matter, it's starting the fourth quarter, but it's a brand new year. And so I want to talk a little bit about what's coming down the pike from the fall and the spring, because in July we had our strategic planning meeting. So just to remind you, our mission is around supporting our learning and development professionals, our HR professionals, people who are really interested in learning, and helping them with their knowledge, their skills, so they build their performance and can drive the performance of the organizations that they support. It's all about networking and being able to build those resources. So our core values are around collaboration, they're around innovation, and they're around contribution. We did a survey, so there's a great deal of dialogue that we have with you, our members, and that makes us better than we were last year, but if the dialogue stops, then our growth stops. There's an old saying, without feedback, there is no learning. So the feedback you give us, the dialogue you have with us, is so important to our success and our capacity to support your success. So what are we going to do this fall? This meeting is the start of some really interesting things that will roll out through the fall and into the spring. Because if you come back to what is really important, trainers and learning and development people can only do so much. So much happens through the relationships you have. So tonight's program is about peer-to-peer coaching, and so that changes the late nature of the relationship, the power relationship, the discussions people have. So it drives learning transfer and sustainability, and we'll hear much more about that. And we'll learn about some of the blind spots we have and how they mess us up. We're set up in 2 different tables, so that was a little bit by design because we wanted to set up affinity groups, so corporate and then people who were either in transition or consulting. Those themes, those things will go through the year. Each is organized around driving a competency that's defined through ASTD as critical to success for our profession, or giving you insight into the trends that are coming down the pike so that you can be on the leading edge, not having the wave break on your head. A couple of other things that we're doing that are so important. There's the webcast. There are communities of practice, one of which Richard Montanero is running with HR Analytics, and he's got that launched, and it's doing some incredibly important things to understand how big data affects HR. I've got 2 new people who are starting a coaching community of practice. So Karen and Denise, let me point in your direction. If you want to say one thing or 2 things, I'll give you the time right now. Only 1 or 2.
Sharing trends, different
Thanks, Karen. And this is part of our effort to bring how to learn directly to you in a way that is very appropriate to what you need. It's all about driving your performance and the performance of your organizations. A couple more things. We have a student outreach effort. And so we've got 2 people who are reaching out to the schools so we can evergreen our profession. Because as you look around the room, it's important to reach out to people in the schools so that we suck them into our world, not just the HR world. And then 2 last things. One is a thank you to Discover Video because they provide all the technology and background and hosting for our videos and our webcasts. And James has been a stalwart making sure that we get recorded and then posted. So for those of you who want to see this again, it's hosted. We've got them archived. You can click. You can see it. You can draw from it, and it's just one of those things that provides an additional resource for you. The last I'd like to do is just recognize the board. And so for people on the board, I'd like you to stand up and say hello. We've got a whole range of people. Ann, would you? Richard, Deborah, Elena, Mary Beth. Each of these folks, Nancy's over in the corner, has dedicated an important part of their professional life to making this work. So not only do we have the people who volunteer, Sissy, I forgot Sissy. No. So anyway, thank you to the board for doing what they do because that makes this place special, and a very special thank you. Okay, so let me hand it over to next person that is Laura or Mary Beth on recognizing new members. You understand we have 2 people who are chairing our membership. This is their first meeting as membership chairs. So they are learning to dance together.
Hi, I'm Laura McNerney, and I'm the new co-chair for membership with Mary Beth Schroeder. So we will learn to dance together really well, I know that. So we are going to do a couple things tonight, but the first is that we'd like to welcome any new members that we have this evening. So if you are a new member, could you please stand up, and we'd like to just walk over and have you introduce yourself to the group. Oh, here we go.
Hi, Laura. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Rubin. I am a human resources specialist at Goodwill of Western Northern Connecticut, but I got my master's at Fairfield U, Industrial Organizational Psychology, so I try to bring the training to Goodwill as much as I can, and I think this is going to be a great resource to help me do that. So it's great meeting everybody. I'm sure I will meet everybody, so I'm excited.
Welcome.
Thanks.
And, good, over here.
Hi, I'm Sandra Pratt. I'm one of those people in transition. I've just retired from GE, where I had spent 38 years in quality leadership and compliance training and development. So I'm excited to be here and excited to launch my next adventure.
Thank you. Welcome. Is that it? Any other members? Okay, well, welcome both of you, and hope we see you every month. So, what's next, Ross?
Resource table or 2 volunteers.
Okay, so while I'm up here, we have a dual role. We also take care of volunteer recruitment for the chapter. So a couple things. As you know, we recently we did our roles, and we have some needs for some volunteers in different areas. First off is publicity. We have one terrific volunteer that is joining us. We'd like to find another one or two. But in terms of helping us with media relations and prioritizing our meetings, the communication that goes out, connecting TV, radio, all of those sorts of things, we'd love some help with PR. So if that's an interest to you, Martha, who I'll be turning the mic over to in just a moment, could use that help. Also, Elena, who is our vendor relations chair, is looking for some help with sponsorships. So if you have an interest in helping us identify vendor opportunities for sponsorship with our meetings, that would be terrific. And then finally, programming. We have two co-chairs in programming, Debbie and Sissy, and they are always looking for help with trying to bring the best programming that we can to you. So if you have an interest in working in programming, we would love to have you. All right? And there are volunteer opportunity forms on the resource table. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Martha Kramer. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the resource table. And of course, I also want to add my welcome to everyone. So we actually have a two-part resource table tonight. To my right is information about ASTD, both in terms of training, CPLP, and also some of the benefits of being a member locally as well as nationally. So we encourage you to look at these materials. The volunteer information that Laura just mentioned is right here. On the left part of the resource table, we have information from our speaker, which is right here. And you're welcome to take these, as well as information about some of our members. So if you have a service or a book or an article or something that you would like to bring to the attention of your colleagues here, you're welcome to do that on the resource table. We just ask that at the end of the night you take those materials with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Elena.
Hi, everyone. Just want to put a plug in for sponsorships. We do not have a sponsor tonight, but we do have sponsorship opportunities for the rest of the year. We also have a networking sponsorship vendor, how do you want to call this? Evening, okay, for our chapter coming up in November, where I'll be reaching out for some suggestions around organizations that provide products and services to our HR industry that we would like to have as part of a networking evening in November. And for those of you who haven't sponsored us but are interested, please feel free to contact me. Or if you know of a really great organization that we should bring into our chapter to learn about, sponsorships provide us the opportunity to learn about great products and services that are out there to support us. So please let me know, and there's information on our website as well. Does this go to you? Oh, to you.
All right. I think we've made it. We're getting right to the final to our presentation. So welcome, everyone. Glad to see such a full room. My name is Debbie Jackson. I co-chair programs with Sissy McKee. And I'm really pleased to present tonight our program with Phil LeNir from Coaching Ourselves. Tonight we bring something a little different on the 70-20-10 model. And so we're concentrating on that 20%, where traditionally in our world we're in that 10% area. The 20% is obviously reflective and mentoring learning. Philip LeNir is the co-founder and president of Coaching Ourselves, and he's going to share with us their methodology, discuss a case study, which is actually on the back of the room. He's got a couple of case studies and some fact sheets on Coaching Ourselves. And we're also going to take the opportunity and the time tonight to actually experience a peer coaching module. So hence why we kind of separated a few, and we're going to try to get all this in tonight. So a little bit about Phil. His experience and background was actually engineering.
He received his engineering bachelor's degree from McGill University. He came from down from Canada, and we won't hold that against you, but he's from Montreal and drove down to present for us tonight. He also holds a master's in management right after he had founded Coaching Ourselves during that time. So he had shared with me a story about the founding of Coaching Ourselves, and I'd like to share this with you. While I won't have all the details, I want to give you an idea on why Phil is as passionate as he is about his work in his organization. So if we go back to around 2003, and Phil is an engineer, it's during the tail end of the dot-com crash, which I'm sure most of us will remember that. Phil was a senior director for a high-tech organization. He was leading several software teams at the time, and his organization was going through a multitude of layoffs, rounds of layoffs, one after the other. And at the same time, his organization was bought by a large American firm. So post-acquisition, many layoffs, they were faced with then offshoring to the Ukraine. And as most of us would understand, and also have probably seen this scenario repeat itself more than once, it was a difficult time for both him and his team. His managers approached him as for how could he help them with managing all this change. How do they gain the skills for managing offshore teams? How do they manage the environments to keep their teams engaged? How are they going to acquire potential new skills required of themselves in this new world, given the changing mindset of the dot-com crash? So with this, Phil was also searching himself as for how do I help my team and how do I help myself lead the group through all this managing change. And he was also looking for something than a course, than going to a different than attending a course. So through several events, he searched out and had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Henry Mintzberg, a well-known academic in the business field. Mintzberg consulted with Phil on how he and his teams could become better managers through learning meetings as a team. So he himself implemented over the course of the next few years a peer coaching and skill building model. Hence, in 2007, Coaching Ourselves was founded. To date, it's been used by over 10,000 managers in 8 different languages around the world. So traveling from the beautiful city of Montreal, please give a warm welcome to our presenter, Phil LeNir.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Just test the technology here. Is it working? Excellent. So thank you very much for having me here and giving me this opportunity to present to all of you the story of what we've been doing with peer coaching at Coaching Ourselves. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to share just a bit of the background of where this comes from, Professor Mintzberg and some of his work, and where it comes from the management education, and how we've taken his work in management education, pulled it down to management development and leadership development, talk about some case studies, some of our experiences helping organizations use our approach, or Professor Mintzberg's approach, for the peer coaching. And most importantly, with the last half hour or so, I'll turn it over to all of you to try one of our modules, or at least part of one of our modules, together in your affinity groups, and work together to share some of your strategic blind spots or not, and help each other think through some of the challenges that you may have growing your careers, growing your businesses, and these sort of things. So, first, Professor Mintzberg. How many people here have heard of Professor Mintzberg? Okay, so what's mattering? So he's a very well-known author and professor, and he's co-founder of Coaching Ourselves. Professor Mintzberg started actually in 1973. He graduated from MIT, and it was his thesis, I believe, that became his first book, The Nature of Managerial Work. What was very interesting about Professor Mintzberg from the very beginning is all this work came from observational studies. So he did observational studies of what was going on in the real world, and then he had this marvelous way of articulating what he saw and presenting so the rest of us could understand what was going on in the real world. And this was perhaps a bit different from especially what was going on in 1973, when perhaps many of the academics were telling managers what they should be doing. Professor Mintzberg was simply articulating what they were actually doing. And surprise, surprise, managers were spending a lot of time running around, getting interrupted, never focusing for longer than 7 minutes on any single task. Things that, frankly, are even worse today with emails and text messages and all these kind of things. So Professor Mintzberg continued studying all sorts of aspects of management, from organizational forms, emergent strategy, which is a fantastic view of how strategies actually get created in companies, and it doesn't have a whole lot to do with strategic planning. And then in 2003, actually, he published this book, Managers, Not MBAs, and he turned his focus on management education. So he was looking at how are managers being educated and how are they actually learning to become managers. And at the time, and even today, management education, MBA, is largely focused on the case study methodology. Certainly there's some lectures, there's more and more reflective learning. And Professor Mintzberg, when he came about and took a look at what was going on, he suggested that if we can give managers an opportunity to simply reflect on their own experience, in other words, what they did yesterday and the day before and last week, the meetings they went to, how they handled making decisions, all these kind of things, and we do it, as he says, in light of conceptual ideas. So conceptual ideas are what the professors are articulating based on their observational studies of what's going on. So we're painting a broad picture of what's going on in the real world, and we're giving managers an opportunity to think about what they do within the context of this broad framework. And finally, we're doing it in a small group of managers together so they can share their thoughts about what they've been doing, what they'd like to do better, and how they're going to go about getting there, and do that within a peer group, essentially. And this, he says, is the most powerful tool we have for management learning. So Professor Mintzberg in 1996 started a program at McGill University called the IMPM program, and this was based fundamentally on this approach to management education, which is very much in sharp contrast to MBAs, where what are we doing in an MBA? Typically the case study methodology, and what's the case study? We're learning from somebody else's experience. We're reading a case study, and then we're talking about that. Professor Mintzberg says, no, let's talk about our own case studies, in other words, what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and try to learn from these experiences. One of the things that I remember surprised me, and I think really brought this to light, and I was sharing this with Ross just earlier, when I observed Professor Mintzberg trying to help new professors teach in his programs, he told the professors, and I remember because we were in Shanghai at the time, and he was setting up a Chinese IMPM version, Chinese program of his IMPM program, and he was explaining to the professors that in his program, the professor was not allowed to talk for more than 50% of the time, just as a rule of thumb. And so the professor would say, well, what happens? And then Professor Mintzberg says, that's when the learning starts. That's when they start talking. So this is Professor Mintzberg. I come along, as Deborah says, and I was looking for a way to help my team do management and leadership development. I didn't have a lot of budget. I didn't have a lot of time. And as an engineer, I had this image that I wanted something that works right away. So I had this sort of real short-term focus, which was to be expected after the dot-com crash. And Professor Mintzberg, Deborah did mention it, the first thing he told me to do was to go read his book, which I did, Managers, Not MBAs. And that got me started down this path of management and leadership development, the methodology, and eventually I started this company with Professor Mintzberg. So this is not management development. This is a lot of people listening to a professor lecture about some aspect of business administration or perhaps some case study. This is Mintzberg's IMHL program, which is his program for health leadership. And as you can see, the students or the participants are in round tables. They spend their time looking at each other, talking to each other, not staring at the professor, listening to him lecture. The professor will be there, and he will start by introducing some conceptual idea, a tidbit of an idea, and then he'll turn it over to the participants to share their experiences around what they've done, always in light of this conceptual idea. So it gives them a language to share their experiences. It gives them a way of contextualizing their experiences in a broader perspective, and they'll do this iteratively. So they'll share a little bit of content, They'll talk for a couple of minutes, and then they'll go back to the professor and continue in this iterative manner, going deeper and deeper into not only the content, but their own experiences and their own perspectives of these experiences to make sense of them, which is a lot of sense-making and learning. And I certainly believe that for management and leadership development, especially for this area, these soft skills, this approach to learning and development is going to be far more powerful than some of the other approaches. So I came along, 70-20-10. So Professor Mintzberg's working on this approach to management education. He set up a number of programs, and there's a number of programs that are taking Professor Mintzberg's ideas. Certainly they're all there in Managers, Not MBAs, and they're being applied in a number of MBA programs as they start to adapt, become more reflective in their approach to management development, and certainly the peer learning and these sort of things. At the same time, we all know about the 70-20-10. This is a framework that came from the CCL, Center for Creative Leadership, many, many years back. The 70-20-10 framework, as we all know, it's an observational study. So it's not a model or rules or anything like that. It's a large series of observational studies that the CCL and a number of other organizations did. And they simply observed what's going on the ground. How are people in organizations becoming better at their jobs? How are they learning the skills that they need, use the tools that they need to improve their performance, to make the company produce the products and services that they're going about producing. And roughly speaking, and this is of course statistical, about 10% comes from the classic training and development that's offered at the time and even today to a certain degree. Sort of the classroom lectures or the e-learning, which is really a morph of a classroom lecture in an electronic format. About 20% was coming from feedback and coaching. And really, feedback and coaching, at its simplest, it happens all the time. You get to the job, you try to hit print, it doesn't print, you ask your buddy, hey, I can't get my print, I can't get this PowerPoint to print out, can you help me? Click here, click there. That's it. That's mentoring. It's happening all the time. And then 70%, the vast majority of what we learn to get our jobs done comes from experience. And this is, of course, you do something, it doesn't work, you think about it, and then you do it again. That's all it is. Learning from experience, you try again, you think about what you do. The key that we found, or at least through coaching ourselves and this idea of getting people in these peer mentoring groups, is people can only learn through experience if they have a chance to reflect on that experience. So especially for managers and leaders, they're going around really running, if you remember the original observational studies, and they're action-oriented, and they're going on and on and on. They rarely have a chance to sit back and really think about, how am I managing? How are we managing together? How are we going to get better at managing? What can we do to improve the situation? And they need that time to stop and reflect. And of course, doing it in groups of peer groups give them the opportunity to mentor and support one another. So coaching ourselves, or I should say Mintzberg's approach, and 70-20-10 really are one and the same. They came from different backgrounds, but they're really saying the same thing, and they've discovered or seen the same observations in terms of how people are learning and improving their performance on the job. The last thing to tie this together with coaching ourselves and the 70-20-10, and this is another perspective, and really I've learned to see this, especially for coaching ourselves and the peer mentoring. It's this idea that you're going to help people extract learning from work. Right? And this comes from the 70-20-10 forum. For those who haven't seen the 70-20-10 forum, it's an organization online based out of Australia, set up by originally Charles Jennings, who's well known in the 70-20-10 world. And it just got piles and piles of resources on 70-20-10 for L&D professionals who are looking to learn more about it. And so what they see is this sort of flow. Originally, there's this idea of adding learning to work. In other words, adding activities to work that have the explicit purpose of assisting learnings, which is taking people out to teach them in the classroom and tell them how to do work. And your metrics are learning metrics, learning to work. Then we started this idea of embedding learning in the workflows. So you have this idea of having a resource, and people can go and look at a video on how to accomplish something. They've got books, they've got e-learning that's on demand, these kind of things. And finally, this idea of extracting learning from work. And this is really where we're getting people to learn from their experience. So we're saying you've got tons of potential lessons based on what you did last week, especially as a manager and a leader. Let's try to figure out how you can learn from that so you can drive back into work and improve your performance. And that's really what 70-20-10, Mintzberg, and these sort of folks are all talking about. So I come along in 2003, I'm looking for some way to do this, and I also don't have a lot of budget to go to one of Professor Mintzberg's programs at the time, which was fortunate because it forced me to innovate and try to do it myself with my team. I had the great fortune to know Professor Mintzberg very well, and I got access to Professor Mintzberg's and all the professors working in his various university programs around the world. I got their PowerPoint slides, their lecture notes, and everything was already structured for these sort of cycles of read, reflect, discuss in short 10-minute cycles, and I adapted that to start working with my team. So I got together, the 6 of us. I was the facilitator de facto, and I had these 90-minute sessions to reflect on our own experiences, what we did last week, in light of conceptual ideas, and we'd have a module on decision-making, we'd have a module on culture, we'd have a module on strategy, everything that the professors were lecturing about in the various programs that Professor Mintzberg had set up. And we're talking about professors like Ed Schein and Clay Christensen now, and we have a number of different professors that are going about and helping us create these modules. So, what are they? They're 90-minute peer coaching modules. They're written by these management thinkers. We've got about 75, and I'm going to continue back. It's these little iterative cycles that make it really work well. The idea of getting people together, introducing a bit of content, turning it over to them, and then going back and introducing a bit more content, turning it over to them. And when I say turning it over to them, you're putting questions on the table that get them to talk about their own experiences. So you're not talking about the content. You're not talking about, what do you think about Ed Schein and his perspective on corporate culture. You're saying, talk about what you think about your corporate culture around here using one aspect of Ed's model, right? And so now I'm going to talk about, well, I think my culture's like this, or we have a culture where we're always late for meetings, and maybe it's because of this value that doesn't quite align with the corporate values we have around here. These sort of discussions are going to start to come out on the table, which gets people to start to think about, what they can do about it, what they've been doing about it, and these kind of things. So it's these little cycles over the 90-minute cycle that create this kind of journey, if you wish, where people are reflecting backwards on their experience, then they're talking about what's going on currently, and then they're pushing forward, reflecting on action that they're going to go as they leave these sessions to change things. It gets real interesting when you start to string these together. So now you've got your peer coaching groups, typically 5 or 6. You put them together to have these sessions, and you start to use this like a Lego building block. And you can start to build interventions and programs. You can blend it with other existing programs that you have to change people's perspective, change people's mindset, get them to think deeper and deeper in terms of what they're going. So people are coming in with their experiences into each one of the sessions. The concepts are coming from the topics or the modules that you have, and then they do these 90 minutes of reflective learning, and they go out with these new insights, these new perspectives about what they've been doing and what they'd like to do, and they try to do something. They make an impact. They perhaps go and change a business process. Perhaps they pull their guys together to say, I want to have a different kind of meeting because I realize the kind of meetings we've been having have frankly not been as productive as they could have been because, I thought about this and reflected on that. And then they come back for another session, perhaps a month later, with the same team. So you start to put these modules together or these sessions together with the different teams, and now you have all sorts of opportunities to combine people in different ways, intact management teams, peer groups, cross-functional groups, place different modules in front of them and have them follow some sort of a curriculum over time so that you can move people's thinking, you can help them figure out the way that they want to act or behave to be able to improve the performance of the workplace, based, of course, on the strategic needs of the organization, which is the original motivation for any L&D program that you're going to institute. We've been doing this now for a couple of years. As Deb mentioned, we've been very, very fortunate, and again, this is due to the connections to Professor Mintzberg and many of the academics. By pure serendipity, Japan's our largest market. We have a fantastic partner in Japan that has launched Coaching Ourselves under the brand name Reflection Roundtable in Japan, and that's spread to many, many different organizations. So there's a great number of different ways that you can use the conceptual ideas of Professor Mintzberg, with or without our modules, to help the people that you work with in your organizations. So I'll just give you some examples. Here's in Natura in Brazil. And they're using Coaching Ourselves in what they call a reflection cafe format, getting people together, putting them into a table, perhaps over lunch hour, and placing one of these modules in each table and having them work together. And of course, based on how you mix the tables, they're not only learning from each other, but they're building a sense of community across this broader cohort. And of course, as you run multiple reflection cafes, people start to mix and mingle, and you can really do some interesting OD work along with the L&D work that you're doing with these groups. Here we have at an off-site Standard Life in Canada, and here we're looking at improving collaboration. So we've got 250 managers and 50 tables of 5 simultaneously working on a module, of course, collaborating to learn together. You have another here, a senior leadership team in Mexico City, and this is from one of Professor Mintzberg's original programs, IMPM, and they're doing an early form, if you wish, of Coaching Ourselves, where they get together on the factory floor, typically probably once a month or once a quarter, and they talk about how they're managing the manufacturing facility that they're managing and how they're going to do a better job by reflecting on how they go about doing it with the conceptual ideas that come from Professor Mintzberg's program. Here we have high potential teams. So high potentials, classic cohort that you might be working with. You're looking for some way of helping high potentials. Peer coaching, any peer coaching methodology, frankly speaking, will be a fantastic tool for high potentials to work together, to learn from each other, and to help one another grow in their careers as is expected given their role as high potentials. Team development, here you have an ING. So again, you're looking at helping management teams, give them a tool that they can pull together to work on teamwork, collaboration, and solving their leadership challenges and these sort of challenges that have, if you wish, aren't operational issues, but directly impact operational issues. Yes?
So it seems to me that, when you're doing these, especially with the build community in Sao Paulo, you're doing a large group intervention. So you're building a series of learnings at each of those tables that then, do you come back and have them share that, or is that disseminated so you develop sort of a center of gravity for the group, or is that stayed within the table in the individual reflection and the individual discussions?
So what's done typically is there's a plenary that's going to be run at the end. Each one of the tables are going to be given about 5 minutes from the end of the session to the plenary, where they're going to go back on some of the key insights that they drew out of their discussions as it relates to them so that they can share with the other tables. You get some interesting cross-table sharing at that point in time, and discussions will start to break out, of course, as people see. Because what happens is that the tables inevitably, typically go in different directions, and they're quite surprising. I mean, you put a group of 5 or 6 people with content and say, share your experiences, and some people are, all the way over here talking about this challenge that they're dealing with, and other people's are there. So there's a lot of interest coming out of the differences that get exposed from this kind of sharing. The other thing, and this is the community building, and this is something that Professor Mintzberg has some articles, especially one in HBR that was published a couple of years back on rebuilding organizations as communities, or building community and organization. And this is a trend that I'm seeing more and more in terms of the dialogue that's going on, in terms of how you can help, I guess, rekindle the sense of belonging and that we're all working together to develop the products and services that our organization wants. So in many cases, Professor Mintzberg will say this wonderful thing, organizations are not collections of human resources, they're communities of human beings. And how can we start to help this community, strengthen the community, help them work together, belong to the community so that they can become more engaged and work together to produce what the organization is tasked with producing. And Coaching Ourselves, or peer coaching, all of Professor Mintzberg's programs lead to this sort of community building, as well as the individual learning and the group learning. Any other questions at this point before I get into the case studies?
It would appear, and I don't know enough about it, taking Peter Senge's work earlier, Chris Archer's work, double loop learning,
Yeah.
And is this a way of driving it to the peer level rather than designed exercises to reflect on learning, et cetera, et cetera? I'm trying to see where Mr. Senge and what often where peer coaching is the difference in Mintzberg's work. Is it complementing or different?
Right. So I don't know the exact answer to that, but I feel like that's correct, what you're saying, in the sense that You know, Ed Schein wrote a paper about coaching ourselves, where he talked about the original work that he's done many, many years ago and compared coaching ourselves to the T groups and these kind of things. And they're all similar in the sense that I suspect they're all saying very much similar things.
This seems like it's driving it really to the pure level, less conceptual and more practical.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to the peer level, and that came from my very fortunate, world where I didn't have any money to go to a course, and I didn't have any opportunity to do anything, and I really had to do something, so I just tried something. I just said, guys, we're going to get together. And, you know, originally the management team, they looked at me, they thought I was crazy. I mean, we're engineers, and what do you mean we're going to reflect on our experiences? That's a waste of time, right? We have to do something, right? and I told them, I said, guys, we're going to, 50 hours a week we're running around doing things. How about 49 hours we run around and 1 hour we think, about how we're doing things, and maybe try to think about how we can, be better managers. And that sort of started this whole process. Yes?
So there's a model where like high potentials would come together and do a project together for the betterment of the organization. It's sometimes called experiential learning.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you could compare this to that.
So action learning, if I can use that term, action learning and coaching ourselves or peer coaching are extremely similar. There's a great number of similarities. Certainly conceptually, they're almost the same in the sense that it's a reflective learning process. We have one partner, and that's in the case study that's about to come up, where he blended the two. So he'll do an action learning and then a coaching ourselves, and then an action learning and then a coaching ourselves. Okay, so the action learning is, they're going to come up with a work project, or they have some sort of a work project. The facilitator is going to help them reflect on what they can learn from going about trying to solve this problem so that they can grow self-awareness, try to figure out better ways of solving the project, essentially. Coaching ourselves starts with the conceptual material. In other words, it'll introduce, let's say, a framework for decision-making, if that's going to be the topic, but then it's going to ask you a question about how have you made decisions in the past week or two as it relates to this first aspect of the model. And that's going to start off a reflective learning process where they're going to bring up problems, bring up systemic issues, bring up all sorts of different ways of seeing decision-making. So, for example, they might start off with saying, oh, look at that, we always use an analytical approach to decision-making, and maybe that's why we aren't so innovative around here, for example. Right? And then they're going to start to fall from there to try to see if they're talking about innovation and how they can increase that. So very, very similar, and certainly they can be combined and are combined. Yes?
When I think of the term coaching, I think of asking good questions and sharing different perspectives. Are you teaching those skills to the groups before they start the reflection process?
No. In a nutshell, no. So, but they learn those skills as they go about doing coaching ourselves or peer coaching. So, two things. First, typically more and more there's somebody who's facilitating or supporting these peer coaching groups to get going. Right? This can be an internal facilitator or an external facilitator. Sometimes there'll be manager champions who'll be trained up to do this support, but there's somebody there to provide that support. The questions are embedded in the content by the professors, so they're asking sometimes pretty pointed questions to get people to talk about themselves, about their perspective on how they do things and these sort of things. And then if people aren't asking more exploratory questions, then the coach or the support person will go and get that going. At the end of each one of these sessions, there's a couple of minutes where they're going to reflect back on the process and learn how to learn better so that they can slowly become, or rapidly become, depending on the context, self-sufficient and use these things. Inevitably, somebody's always going to act as a facilitator, though in many cases that will be shared over time as people get more experience doing these kind of things. It takes a little bit of time, but it becomes very fluid, very rapidly, especially as people get into that, I almost call it like a bubble. It's like this sort of space that they create where they talk about what they're really thinking, right? And what they really feel about what's really going on around them and how they're interacting with the environment and what they can do about it. And that's when things start to really change in terms of their behavior and their perspectives and the impact that they have on the organization. Yes?
Yeah, part of me is struggling what's new here. conducted management development programs where there is no content.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You can have managers in the room. They're going to talk about delegation.
Right.
And the conversation can go anywhere. People learn from it what they can learn from other people. Right? Sense that I'm getting, and this is my question, is, most of the time curriculum is content with reflection questions at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sensing that your curriculum is a series of questions with little tidbits to think about models. Okay? And that's what you're paying for. You're paying for these questions that are targeted, well thought out, that will help facilitate excellent group conversation. Is that correct?
To a certain degree, yes, you're absolutely correct. And it's the flow within which these professors have designed this over the 90-minute. So it starts off with a little bit of content, then the question, then the dialogue, then a bit more content, then another question, and they're building on each other too. These aren't completely independent questions, right? This question will be asking you to reflect back in a deeper way on perhaps the experience you shared at the beginning. You're all going to have one of these modules, so you'll be able to assess for yourself as you go through it to see how, in our case, we have an author, Estelle Metayer, who former McKinsey consultant, now associate professor, and she owns her own company. And she's going to walk you through her ideas on strategic blind spots, but more importantly, she's going to have you think about your strategic blind spots to learn about them, to think about them through this process. But essentially, a little bit of content, a question, a little bit of a discussion, and so on and so forth, but they build on each other. So it's that, if you wish, the pedagogy, the way it builds over the 90-minute, that becomes very, very powerful. And that's what Professor Mintzberg's been doing in the classroom since '96, and it's certainly evolved over the past almost 2 decades now. Yes?
So when you go into an organization, how do you determine what questions will be asked, what modules they're going to be participating in? Is there a needs analysis that's done? And then once they start going through this process of reflection, etc., are they being led to something? Is there an underlying approach that's being sort of touted through these series of questions that they're thinking about and working through in their groups?
So the honest answer is it really depends. Okay? In some organizations, there's a very emergent strategy to this kind of an approach. Because what happens is when you're going about and you're working with these groups, you're also listening, and you're doing a lot of listening, and you're learning about what people are really thinking about what's going on. So you're understanding what's really going on, and then you're adapting the next module. In other words, you're selecting a different module based on the sort of conversations that people were having because you're moving them forward into a deeper thinking. The initial, if you wish, needs analysis tends to be high level, and it tends to be, while we have really poor engagement around here and we need to work on that, we're not really sure why we have poor engagement. We have tons of great studies that show it's because of this and this and this, but you know what, honestly, a big study is not really telling us what's really going on the ground. In other cases, it's more targeted. In other words, you're working with a couple of groups of high potentials. You have a very clear goal. You have to help set them up for the future leadership of this organization. So you're looking to build a future leadership team. You're looking them to build on their personal leadership and leadership skills and these kind of things. And you're going to work around perhaps a competency framework or a competency model that the organization is already working with. And you're going to select modules that will help them talk about some aspects of these competencies or move themselves forward to behave or act in the way that the competencies are expecting them to do. So that's the kind of work that we've typically done.
So it's a wide range.
That's correct. It's a wide range.
I see in all of your photos that you have people sitting together around a table and having a discussion like this.
Yeah.
Have you used any other media to facilitate the discussions?
Do it on the phone, conference calls an awful lot, and WebEx and these kind of things. It works, but as we all know, it doesn't work as well as talking and looking at each other in the eye. It's just that simple. Yes?
There's a lot of talk about millennials and how they have different needs and expectations around learning, and I would think this fits really well with them. But I was wondering if you could comment on your experience about, say, the difference in demographics and how they respond to this kind of methodology.
Again, it tends to depend on the culture of the organization, though I distinctly remember working with one organization, and there were young managers, millennials, had to be sort of late 20s kind of thing. And we got in there, and it was really annoying because they kept texting and looking at their phones, and I couldn't get them to just talk to each other for longer than about 5 minutes before somebody had to do something, you know. So, but once the discussion started, they're very engaged. They really, really want to work together to make things better. And so that idea of working collectively to help one another and start the like the projects that come out of each one of these sessions, they can be individual or they can be collective, because you're working with a collective of managers, and they start to realize very rapidly, in fact, they realize that collectively they can make changes in the organization that have a broad impact. They can go and tell the finance department that the way the finance department is making them fill in these, finance spreadsheets before they start a project is really making a mess of things, and they need that to change. And of course, individually, it's hard to do anything, but collectively, they have far more, ability to change. So millennials, certainly, I've seen them be very, very proactive in terms of going out and making things happen as a result of these things. All right, so I'll go through one case study. I'll see where I am with the timing, and if we have time, we'll do the second case study. If not, you can always pick it up at the end, because I want you guys to have enough time to try one of these modules and just get a feel for it so you can assess for yourselves how it compares to the other forms of learning and development, especially for managers and leaders. So real quick, ERP transition is an organization, large IT department they've got. They're transitioning, this was many, many years back, of course, into an ERP system. When you're going to an ERP system, you're typically coming from a couple of silos, each with their own IT system that they're managing, and the ERP forces you to a large degree to work together. So as well as the technical training, you have to merge these typically functional silos to get them to work together, to trust each other, and do all these kind of things. The organization launched a very solid program, technical training and leadership training for the senior leaders in the organization. It had a good impact, but it didn't have enough of an impact. In other words, it didn't have the type of impact that the CIO was really looking for. Why? Because we had a legacy of low trust that was coming from there. We had a culture in the organization with accountability, a bit wishy-washy, ambiguous decision rights, and this was classic in many organizations. Budgets are tight, they're understaffed. Managers have to focus on the short term. They have to get the results out now, so they're going to do that at the expense of collaborating with their peers and working together, and that's always happens, and that's completely normal. So we have to try to help them work together, but the CIO, very fortunate, had a long-term vision, perseverance, and he kept going at it. So coaching ourselves with a partner that we had working with the client, started a second phase development effort, and this time they focused on the middle managers in the organization. They used, Professor Mintzberg has talked about this in some of his papers, a middle-out approach rather than a top-down or a bottom-out. You're looking at the middle managers and you're getting them to learn and to grow and to develop, and then their impacts are going to not only work with their peers, but of course go down and up. As long as you have an executive champion that's going to help you out, they will go up as well. They were targeting cohorts of middle managers. They were creating change champions, so they're looking at topics that would start to be very reflective. So they're starting on the self, observational skills, reflection skills, and then they're moving outwards, reflection on action, reflection on change, reflection on the different skills that the managers are going to need to be able to merge these silos and do their job as change agents in the organization, which is, of course, a big part of any manager's job in a large organization. So the program was a blended program. They used peer coaching, using Coaching Ourselves modules. They had action learning sessions. They did CIO consultative meetings, so CIO with the middle management teams. Individual online assessments were offered, special group projects, which turned into a big win in a number of cases, and individual coaching was offered. So just the point here is that Coaching Ourselves or peer coaching, in many cases it's blended with a number of other things that you're going to do to solve whatever problem you're trying to solve to get the organization to perform and do the things that it's got to do. The type of results that we saw, this is the program, I believe, is in its third year right now, so it's the third cohort. Each cohort has about a year. Is certainly the cross-functional communication and the type of assessments that we're doing on the impact of the program. yes, there's a lot of sort of feedback. We've got piles of data in terms of what people thought and how they rated it, and it was all really, really great. But the most important feedback came from the customers and from the CIO. We're looking for performance metrics. We're looking to see that it's actually improving the performance from the perspective of the people that are receiving the service, and we're getting that kind of feedback in a significant way. An interesting offshoot that was perhaps unexpected, though shouldn't have been, is the participants themselves started to set up reflection cafes for their peers. So they did this on their own initiative, lunchtime activity. They used the Coaching Ourselves modules because they had the curriculum, they had the content, they knew how to use it, and they started doing it with other peers in their organization. So this is a way for them to spread, break down the silos, and do essentially what they're tasked with doing and learning how to do. A number of graduates we saw move to positions of greater responsibility, specifically as related to the soft skills. Remember, we were working in a technical department. Really strong technical skills, probably not so strong soft skills to begin with. That changed fairly rapidly as a result of the relationships and the sessions, what happened in these sessions, and they moved on to positions where they needed soft skills and they could exercise those soft skills. And of course, the special projects. There was a number of interesting systemic issues that were understood and resolved as a result of these groups having these relationships and learning how to work together to understand what's really going on so that they could implement changes in IT processes and systems. So these are the kind of results that we saw in this one. Any questions on this? No? Yes?
The contrarian view, what seems to surface that you don't anticipate, or you didn't anticipate?
That I didn't anticipate. A whole bunch of interesting things. I mean, group size was the first thing. You know, I was pretty flexible about group size at first, and people were saying, oh, well, we're 8 in the team, and we all know each other, and it's not a problem. We can do this with 8. And statistically speaking, it has a much greater chance of not having any impact because people don't end up getting into this honest discussion. You know, so that was an interesting one. Certainly, you know, and this goes to the needs analysis and these kind of things. Sometimes there'll be, and we all know this when we're out there, there'll be this great needs analysis. There's all these identified sort of, this is what's going on, this is why it's going on, we need to do this and this and this. And then you start working with the teams and you're listening to what's going on and you're like, no, that's not the problem. I'm hearing a completely different set of issues going on here. And we run into the same thing fairly rapidly. I mean, it's the real world. There's a whole, you put 6 people together and anything can happen. Time up? All right. So they're going to be handing out this module, Strategic Blind Spots. I'm just going to skip over this and just explain how it works. So the key is, if you're sitting in a table of like 8, split yourself up into 2 groups of 4. 7 is all right, but it's not ideal because you really will not have enough time in the next 30 minutes to have a proper discussion with 7 people. Just do the math and it doesn't work out. But do the best you can with 7 or a 4 and 3 because 3 is also a bit weak. I can't give you any better advice than that. Maybe there's another table that has 3 get together. One person should facilitate. The way it works is you just go page by page and there's a timing on the top right-hand corner of each page. So you open the first page, you read the instructions, you follow the time, and the facilitator keeps an eye on the time. Typically, the pages are read out loud. You each take a turn reading a page out loud. The last thing that I'll say for all of you, because of the unique environment that you're in or the unique context, it's going to ask you to share a story right at the beginning. You can share a personal blind spot in your career or your business, and if you're in a company, you can talk about perhaps your department. What might be the blind spot of your HR department or your learning and development department, in your opinion, or based on some story or some experience. And just follow the instructions, 1 page at a time. I'm going to go from table to table real rapidly if you have any questions. Okay, guys, can you... Good luck. I don't know how you're going to split. Maybe a 4 and 3 might be best. Yeah, you'll have a better experience than 7. There's just not enough time. Steal one from the table, yeah. Okay. Who's going to be the facilitator? Done. I'll show you quick. Take turns reading a page. Go to the first page. Have one person read it out. 10 minutes and get going. And you can skip the agenda. Yeah, and the timings. I'm sorry, could everybody... We're going to have to stop the exercise if everyone could so we can end. Could we just... I'm really sorry, I have to stop it so that we can end at 8 o'clock. I'm just going to try to get some people from tables to share some experiences. Yeah, I got to quiet them down. Could everyone stop the exercise? Thank you. Sorry for the unnatural interruption. But I'm told we have to end at 8 o'clock or as close as possible to 8 o'clock. So what I want to do, just to wrap this up fairly quickly, is I want to see if I can have 2 or 3 tables, one person from each one of these 2 or 3 tables, just to share some reflections on the experience itself. So we're talking about the learning process, not what was actually learned, but we're talking about here, you know, the peer coaching, how it might be different from what we thought it was, how it might be interesting or useful or not, anything that could be interesting. Yes, please. Okay. In this particular example, of course, there was no instructor. We don't have a facilitator for each table. In many of the organizations, there is somebody who is the facilitator. This could be somebody from the OD department or the OD team that's knows about group work and group facilitation, has a bit of extra training on how to use this material, how to help seed the discussions to achieve the type of outcome that we're looking for. So, for example, and I was talking to another table about this, you'll notice the introductory reflection asks you to share an event where you might have been surprised. You have probably a large number of different events that you could share. A facilitator might help you select a particularly appropriate event to get the discussion to where you want people to go to a certain degree so that they can help realize certain things. So that's the type of role that would happen with that. In other cases, and the case study number 2 uses that quite effectively in a large organization where it was very much an emergent strategy, they trained up a cohort of probably about 15 manager champions to be facilitators for each table, and then they trained up even a second cohort of these manager champions, and they acted as facilitators inside the organization for a large number of groups that started asking for this this approach to help them solve systemic issues or department level problems.
You have that facilitator?
So here's the interesting thing. Again, yeah, it really does depend. I mean, in some cases, groups are just in such a state where they're not going to be able to get out of whatever mess that they're in or way of thinking, that they're going to need somebody to help them move forward. In many cases, they're going to do it by themselves the first time. So you'll come in to say, okay, I want to support you. You say almost nothing, and then you say, you guys don't need me, and you're off. And inevitably, of course, facilitation emerges within the group. It's implicit. It's not an explicit facilitator, but inevitably they're self-facilitating. They're sharing the facilitation. Somebody takes on more of the role of the timekeeper because, you know, they operate the stopwatch on their iPhone. Whatever it is, it tends to emerge in many cases. Okay. That said, I want to add one other thing about the facilitation. So there's this idea of the facilitation, and then I think of it like orchestrating, right? So in a broader sense, you're trying to, you know, lead people or not lead people or help people grow in a certain direction. And so they can facilitate the discussions, but somebody wants to help connect that with the organizational needs and the strategic goals of the organization. And if somebody in the group isn't keep to bringing it back on why they're doing this, why they're spending this time, what we need to get better at together so that we can, you know, solve the problems that we're trying to solve, be it better at collaborating together, be it whatever it is, then somebody's going to have to do that. Otherwise, this process will peter out. It will go a couple of times, and then there'll be no reason for it, and then people won't find time for it, and that's the end of it. So I've talked about sort of things that surprised me in my strategic blind spot. When I started, I thought that this did not need a facilitator. I didn't realize how much of a facilitation role I was playing as a senior director in my organization and driving it for the needs of my team to solve the challenges that we were having as a result of the layoffs, right? So I let people go for it, and it started petering out. And then I started realizing you do need to sort of anchor this with a goal that will change year to year as the organization has new strategic needs, but it still needs to be anchored. Is that good? Okay. Yes.
Bruce, yes.
Any other questions? Any other comments from the table? Experiences in terms of the approach, realizations, thoughts?
I knew you were going to ask a question.
I'm just an academic. The question at our table we talked about was this whole issue of establishing trust. So the question becomes, what gives you some indication that there's enough of candor and trust, and I like to use the term authentic dialogue,
Right.
to start to really get at the heart of the problems and the issues that they're not putting on the table for fear of reprisal?
The most honest answer is, I know it when it's there,
Yeah.
and I know. Actually, more importantly, I know it when it's not. Right? And after doing enough of the groups, you go in and you get that feeling like they're talking a lot, but they're not saying a whole lot, right? And they're glossing over the issues. There's an elf in the room, whatever metaphor you want to use. You can feel that. But as I mentioned to your table, it inevitably happens. It sometimes just takes longer. And the size of the group was crucial to that. So I started off with these larger groups. Trust never happened. The groups fell apart because they weren't having productive dialogues, because everybody was just, saying what they thought they had to say, as opposed to what they were really thinking. So, yeah, trust is crucial to really moving, helping people move themselves forward.
One more?
Yes, behind. Ross? No? Oh.
What I thought was interesting in our dialogue was that people just sort of naturally wanted to help the other people in the group with because we each came from a different organization. Mm-hmm. And so people would say, well, did you think about this? Or, you're really in this market. Did you not consider this? So people were just naturally helping with the problems that they were facing, which
Right.
I thought was an interesting byproduct of the discussion led by the questions.
That's excellent. That's a good segue to one of the reasons why somebody might facilitate. You certainly get in some groups, you'll get these situations where people try to do problem solving right away as opposed to ask exploratory questions, which is where you want them to go. And the sort of instant problem solving is not what's needed for reflective learning at the point. And also the endless analysis of why it happened and da-da-da-da-da. You want to cut it off and keep going and exploring deeper and deeper and deeper. So sometimes somebody has to step in to say, no, this isn't about me showing you other people how to do it. This is about me helping you figure out how to do it yourself by asking exploratory questions if needed, if the questions don't suit already.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate tonight. This was fabulous.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
So we've got a couple of quick things we need to do. Phil has a book that he wants to raffle off. It's the latest Mintzberg book. So there's a can going around. Please drop your card into the can. And Michelle has a different can. So every session we have, we always raffle off another meeting. So if you're not in the meeting can or the book can, you can't kick the can, all right? So to our members who have clicked in and said enjoyed the session, I want to say thank you for being part of us tonight. But you don't get a chance to network with us or to win one of the raffles. So next time, come on in. Our next meeting will be October 20th. So a couple of things, a little bit of the housekeeping. While the people are dropping in their cards, there are meeting evaluations on the table. Please complete those. We look at those carefully. If you have suggestions, please write them in. Suggestions for additional sessions or ideas on how the sessions or meetings could run better. We listen carefully. It's part of the dialogue we like to have with you. Okay. Everybody set with the meeting? Any last cards for the meeting? Mix them up.
Sissy, are you meeting? You sure? I'll come get it.
Yeah, get it.
This is the book.
Justin, when Sissy puts her card in, would you pull out a card for who gets a free meeting? Justin Burtwell.
Can we trust them?
I'll be back in 1 second.
Mary Beth Schroeder.
Mary Beth. Oh. All right, and now it's me for the book.
Last time you picked out your name.
No, I didn't. I think I picked out your name. Megan Schmidt. There you go. So thank you for coming tonight. Safe travels home, and we'll all see you on October 20th. Take care.